Welcome to 1530. This is episode 15.
Summary for today's episode. We've got Rafa Nadal's clay court progress so far this year. It's looking, a little rough compared to most years, but we'll get into that. We're also going to talk about the second greatest clay courter of all time. Rafa is pretty much the indisputable first, so we want to see who comes in second. And finally, we want to talk maybe a little bit about our picks for the French Open, who we think is going to make it all the way, and if anybody can topple Rafa this year, as the door is looking a little more open. And that's what we've got. You want to give us the stat of the day?
We'll go ahead and we'll introduce our hosts, Ben and Matt. The stat of the day. Stat for today, we have 57%. This is 57% of points won on the second serve return. Incredible number there. Another number from the same match is 69% points won on his own second serve points. If you saw these numbers, normally you would guess, and it was clay, you would normally guess this is Rafael Nadal with some dominant numbers, taking it to the player's second serve and also defending his own second serve somehow. These are really Nadal-esque numbers. These are even above his career average on clay. But now these are the numbers of Dominic Thiem in the semifinal where he beat Nadal in straight sets. So we talked about Dominic Thiem last episode and talked about his steady improvements on clay are leading him to mirror Nadal. And we talked about those numbers that he needs to get better at. One of those was his own second serve points, and 69% way above the low 50s where he was. And low 50s is even good enough to win a match, but this is enough to beat the greatest clay courter of all time. And even then it was a very close match. But those are the stats of the day. So Matt, talk to us about what's Nadal been going through.
That's a good question, right? Usually he is really dominant in these clay tournaments leading up to the French Open. This year has not been the case. He hasn't won any of them. Last year he won all but one, I think. And but there's still one going, right? We're in the middle of one right now, and so maybe he can turn it around and go into the French Open with a little bit more confidence. He's got losses to Tsitsipas and Thiem in these last two tournaments, and I think they just hit him off the court. I know in the Tsitsipas match, Rafa dropped the first set and took the second set, and then lost it in the third, obviously. But in the first set compared to the second set, he was hitting the ball inside the baseline, only 12% of the points. Whereas in the second set, he was hitting inside the line. I think it was close to like 34 or 44%, much higher. He was way more aggressive in that second set. And so I think sometimes Rafa just gets a little maybe passive or feels like he doesn't need to be as aggressive with some of these players. And if they come in hitting lines and playing well, then he gets in trouble real fast. And when it's a best of three, then it can be hard to recover from that. I think that's part of what he's facing. Hopefully he turns that around. Hopefully he plays a little bit more seriously. And obviously the French Open, you have to win an extra set, and I think that's going to be a little more tough. We can get to that later, but I think that's kind of what's going on. Is he's going out and playing these players that are coming out way more aggressive than he is, and they're playing well, and they're playing consistently enough to be able to get two sets off of them and to maintain a high enough level to overcome that. But those are my thoughts. That's why I think he's losing. He's too passive.
I agree with you. So last episode, we talked about two main strategies to win on clay. So one was you either outgrind your opponent, right? You get in 20, 30 ball rallies and you steadily gain better position. This is more of what Nadal likes to do, and even Djokovic to some extent. But then the other way is you just play red line tennis, right? You go for the lines, you go for the shot. You don't let Nadal get comfortable. And I think that's really what these guys have been doing. Soderling did it to the extreme, and he still took 5 sets to beat Nadal. But if you look at his losses to Fognini, he's a guy, he can implode on the court, right, mentally, but he can also hit extremely good shots, extremely clean ground strokes, and go for winners. So we saw him do that to Nadal in Monte Carlo. That was a very destructive loss. Nadal was pretty down about the manner that he lost, not just that he lost, but the manner. It was pretty lopsided score. But really, I mean, he took the racket out of Nadal's hands. He didn't let Nadal get comfortable. We saw that with Thiem. The match was close, but ultimately Thiem was not – I mean, he can grind it out, but he was not passive in those big moments. He went for huge shots where even Nadal's defense couldn't out hustle Thiem. And again, we saw with Tsitsipas, even though, like I said, it was a 3-setter, it was a little bit of a dogfight. Tsitsipas wasn't backing down. He was going to the net. He was hitting big shots. And I think Nadal with clay, it's a comfort thing and it's also a confidence thing. And if you give him time and you give him rhythm, then pretty soon he'll be opening up with that buggy whip forehand up the line and he'll be hitting amazing winners. But if you don't even let him get comfortable from the start, that is your chance to win. I'm not saying it's easy. Like you're saying, best out of 5. Maybe almost impossible. I mean, it's been shown that it's possible, but it's very rare to be able to beat Nadal and clay. You have to be on your game and just be ready to outclass him from the start. Don't let him get comfortable in rallies is all I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and one other thing too, so I talked about kind of our model we had for clay court analysis for we talked about for Nadal, all the previous years, the years that he's won and the years that he hasn't won. So really he's been averaging about 2 tournaments a year, one on clay for the major warm-ups, either Monte Carlo, Madrid / Hamburg, when it was formerly Hamburg for clay, Rome, and then leading into the French Open. So 3 years he didn't win it. 2009, he played pretty excellent. He won actually 3 of those tournaments. He still fell in the round of 16 to Soderling. We've talked about that extensively. But in 2014 and 15, he lost, and he didn't have that great of a clay warm-up. And so I think we're seeing the same thing this year. In fact, even worse so. So if he doesn't win Rome, and even before he wins Rome, he's on pace to have a 36% score is what I'm calling it on here. And so his average score is about 78%. That is a whole 2 standard deviations lower than his average. There's some years where he even had like in the high 80s. And this is a percent score based on how far he goes in the tournament. So if he loses in the first round, you get less points versus losing in the semis. And not that he's having that bad of a year, right? I mean, 3 semifinals, people would kill for that in 2 Masters 1000s and a 500. But these are not normal standards. These are Nadal standards. And on clay, we just don't see him losing these tournaments. And I think it's very, very shocking. So if he doesn't go ahead and rally and make a deep run at Rome, I think more than anything, it's going to hurt his confidence going into the French. And he's set up to not have a good year. He's setting up to have a mirrored year of his second worst year of warming up for clay since 2015.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, those are all good thoughts. He certainly needs confidence, especially going into the French Open, and he does not have that right now by any means. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can pull himself together. And I mean, even if he does win at Madrid, I don't know if that would be what the confidence boost that he needs after losing to who he's lost to, these young guns who are coming up.
Yeah, or Rome.
And you've still got Djokovic, who is going to be looming no matter what, and Fed's back after not playing clay for a little while, and so
yeah,
the walls are closing in.
Yeah, they are. It's getting tighter. And funny you mentioned the young guns again. Tsitsipas, we keep talking about Stefanos Tsitsipas, the young Greek. He is now the youngest player to have beaten Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. He's only 20, right? I mean, we know Kyrgios has done it. Some other guys have done it. But Tsitsipas is only 20. There are tons of upside. And Alexander Zverev, who's actually had a decent game on the clay, he's beaten Djokovic and others. He's having a pretty terrible year. He can't seem to string some wins together. So I don't know if it's confidence or what's going on with Alexander Zverev. But Tsitsipas, he's seeming like he's having a great year. And Thiem is just sneakily doing some work. He's playing very solid tennis.
Yep. That is very true.
Yeah.
Really
and actually,
see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. It's going to be exciting. That's why we watch sport. Before we get into who the second greatest clay courter is of all time, I want to build up the suspense a little bit. I also want to talk about Federer. So he had like you said, he's been away from the clay for a long time. He didn't skip a beat in his first match. He won very comfortably over Richard Gasquet, but then he played Gael Monfils, who's a tricky customer, especially on clay, he bageled him 6-0 in the first set. Then after that, it got complicated. He had to save a couple match points, ended up winning in 3 sets. Then the next match he played, he got in some trouble and ended up losing that match to Dominic Thiem. He actually had match points in that one. So Federer, it's interesting. And he won that first set comfortably as well against Dominic Thiem, but then 2 tiebreakers after that. So Fed, I don't know if it's weird if he's like, I psych himself out. I got to really focus on the first set in clay. And then he wins the first set. And then after that, he can't string the game together. And I've seen that before in the French where he goes, maybe 4 or 5 sets against lesser opponents that he probably shouldn't. But I mean, he's back on clay, right? He looks good, but also there's an asterisk. I think there may be exposure on the game that an opponent can come back on him. But
yeah,
enough about.
No, that's good. Fed's an enigma to me, especially on clay. I feel like talking about passiveness, I feel like he struggles to be aggressive sometimes, and that'll get you in trouble. I mean, Thiem lost that first set in that match, but yeah, I came back and it was hitting extremely well in second and third sets, and obviously it was enough to knock Fed off and even save, those match points like you mentioned. It'll be interesting to see where Fed gets in the French Open.
Yeah, it's all going to be contingent on draw for me to see how far he can go. If he has too many of these 4 or 5 sets early on, he's not going to be able to make a deep run. It's going to be too difficult.
I agree.
So, well, let's go ahead and talk about it. Second greatest clay quarter of all time. So there's a lot of different criteria. So we started looking on one of our favorite websites, ultimatetennisstatistics.com, and saw, there's some different criteria. How do we judge, right? Who's the best player of all time? So first you can go based off of win percentage on clay. I think that's a pretty safe criteria. So we have for our top few, of course, Rafael Nadal, number 1, with about 92% clay matches won. Phenomenal. The second is Bjorn Borg with 86%. Ivan Lendl, which surprised me there, 81%. Lendl was great. And then Guillermo Diaz from Argentina at about 80%. Ken Roswell, number 5, and Novak Djokovic, number 6. And both Roswell and Djokovic are about 79%. So pretty surprising. I thought, honestly, Federer maybe wouldn't be top 5, but I thought he would be top 10. He's down there at number 15. Dominic Thiem is at number 16. And they're both at 76 and 74% respectively. So I thought that was interesting. And Djokovic is right there, close to the top 5. But Nadal and Bjorn Borg was one I did expect to be pretty high up there.
Yeah, after Rafa, he has the most French Open titles, right? I think he's got 6.
Yep, and he was one too where it was crazy because it's usually really difficult, especially back then. When he was playing McEnroe to be able to win the French Open and Wimbledon back-to-back because of the huge difference in court speeds. Wimbledon was even faster back then, favored the big servers, and clay. I mean, some people have argued it's slower, but still a very slow surface. So he was able to switch back and forth with hardly any time between the 2 tournaments and win it several times. Only Nadal and Federer, I believe, have been able to complete that double as well, win Wimbledon and French in the same year. So pretty impressive. And Nadal's done.
That's nice.
Yeah. So what are some other criteria here?
So the way I looked at it, and since we know that Rafa's got that top spot, and we're looking at the second best, I took Djokovic's numbers and I took out anything that involved Rafa Nadal, right? Since we're not including them, Bjorn Borg didn't have to play Rafa. He got 6 titles. Djoko only has 1 French Open. He's got something like 30 titles total. Oh, I'm sorry. 14 total clay titles. And I went back and looked at that win percentage. And like you said, Novak's down at like 6th, around 79% on clay. But when you take out all of the losses that he has to Rafa and all the times that he played, as well as Fed, I put Fed in there as well. So if you take out Fed and you take out Rafa, his win percentage climbs up to about 85.5%, which is half a percentage shy of Ivan Lendl's, or I'm sorry, of Bjorn Borg's. And my thought is looking at the NBA, right? You have had some really good teams in the past few years that in any other year would win a title, would win an NBA championship. But the Golden State Warriors have just been prolific. They've got a team where their 5 starters are called the death lineup. You know, you don't want to go up against them. And so similar to the Golden State Warriors, you have Rafa Nadal, who has just been in a complete impasse. And so if you take that out and you look at, you know, who's runner up, I think that Novak's case is made much stronger when you take those numbers out and you look at that. If you look at Bjorn Borg's ELO rating, he had the highest ELO rating for, I think, 4 years running there on clay, his clay ELO rating, I think between 1978 and 1982, he had the highest ELO rating. Whereas Djokovic has had either the first or the second highest ELO rating on clay for, I think, about 10 years or I guess 8 years, from 2011 to current. And so I think that shows, as much as I hate to admit it, I'm not a big fan of Djokovic. He has had significantly more consistency and would have more wins had he not been in the shadow of Rafa Nadal. And therefore, my argument is that Novak would take that second place all-time clay quarter over anybody. Bjorn Borg, sure, he has more, French Open titles or something like that. I just think he's more consistent. I think that his current titles don't show what they would without Rafa in his matchup. If you were playing in Bjorn Borg's time, I think you would have just as many, if not more, titles. That's my argument.
Yeah, no, it's a good point that you bring up about eras. I think that's something we take for granted, right? We're in what they call the golden age of tennis, where we have 3 all-time greats and Murray and Stan who are also at least Hall of Famers, right? We have Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, and many other really good players. And a lot of people have argued, well, if Nadal wasn't in the French Open, wasn't in those finals, Federer would have 3 or 4 more French Open titles. And maybe that's true. But I think I am inclined to agree with you as well, because Djokovic, his numbers and his game, they suit clay very well. And he has won a lot of the Masters 1000s titles on clay that Federer hasn't. Federer hasn't won Rome. Federer hasn't won Monte Carlo. He's played well at the French, been consistent at the French. But Djokovic definitely has underperformed just due to Nadal. And so I think it's like you're saying, if you're going to match titles, that's one thing. But if you're going to match the points won or the ELO or these other stats where maybe it's easy to be overlooked if you are the second best, because no one usually looks at the second best in the same era. So I think that's a good point that you bring up there. But win percentage also, I don't know. The win percentage for Bjorn Borg is pretty incredible. Still, even if you took out the losses to Fed and to Nadal, you had it at 80% about. But Bjorn Borg's is still, or no, you said 86%. Yeah, so that's about the same. That's pretty close to
Yeah, he's just shy of Bjorn's.
Yeah, and I don't know what the level of competition was with the clay back in the 80s. Don't know if it was as good. I know because Ivan Lendl was late 80s, but I guess that's something to be out on the jury. So a couple other criteria I looked at as well for the second best clay quarter. So we already talked about match percentage, right, for who's winning the most clay court matches. But let's look at Grand Slam, because that's really where the big performers are, right? So in the clay Grand Slam. So Nadal, he's won 98% of his French Open matches. Pretty amazing. He's won 96, or is it 86, and he's lost 2 of them. Bjorn Borg, second, as expected, with about 93% of his Grand Slam matches won. French Open. Mats Wilander, he's won 84%, so it's a big drop off there. And then Djokovic, close right there again, 83%. So there you go. Djokovic has shown up in multiple of the categories, but Bjorn is also there as well. Number 5 is Gustavo Kuerten, and then Jim Courier, Ivan Lendl, Federer down to 8, and then Jimmy Connors 9. So interesting. I was even surprised to see Andy Murray at number 10. We always used to call him a poor clay quarter, and he was early on. He couldn't really even match to save his life. But his movement, I think, overall, and his comfort on clay just improved dramatically, and he's done much better at clay in recent years. I remember when he beat Nadal in Madrid in the final, and it's like, okay, yep, Murray's found a way to play clay.
Yep.
So that's impressive. And then one other criteria, which I think is kind of an underrated one. You know, we look again a lot of titles, a lot of matches won, but do we think about how dominant someone is, right? Because it depends on, you know, matchups. Who do people play? Well, how badly or how big is your win over people? Well, that's when you want to look at the total points won as a percentage. And the top three are Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. Excuse me, wrong order. Nadal's first, Djokovic, Federer. And those are 56.2%, about 54%, and 53.5% for Federer. So pretty close spread there. And then Thomas Muster and Jim Courier are after that, rounding out your top five. So interestingly enough, three people from the same era, they're winning the most total points won as a percentage on clay, which again, I was actually pretty surprised to see Federer up that high. But just showing that these guys, you know, even in matches that they lose, they're keeping it close because they're able to just win point in and point out on clay.
Yeah, that is an interesting stat to look at, and especially, mentioning that they're three from the same era, they're gobbling up all the points that that their opponents are playing. It would just really stink to be obviously it wouldn't stink, but it would stink to be a tennis player, a very good tennis player in this era, if your name was not Nadal, Djokovic, or Federer.
Yeah.
How many people at any other time in tennis would go home with slams and tournament titles, but not in this era. Not with the big three. It's crazy.
The other players haven't found a way. I mean, besides a Pete Sampras, to rack up more titles, because you really have a three-way race. Federer has the most titles of all time. Nadal's not that far behind him, and Djokovic could even make a late run if he keeps winning titles and Federer maybe slows down. So that's what's crazy, is that they're all three in the same era winning this many Grand Slam titles. I think it's really mind-boggling, and hopefully we can appreciate it now, because I think we'll look back and be like, man, that was a fantastic era of tennis. Just like people, there's a resurgence as far as people digging tennis when Bjorn Borg and McEnroe played. That kind of was a resurgence as well. So I think maybe we can see that, and we've seen a lot of people get into tennis and enjoy tennis due to these great stars. And then again, you already mentioned Elo, but I'll just kind of recap it again. So on my rankings here, Nadal above, leading the way with the 26.68 peak Elo rating. Bjorn Borg not that far behind, about 30 points behind him at 26.38. Ivan Lendl, shocked to see him in there again. Again, if you see multiple names kind of in similar places in the rankings on multiple different criteria, maybe there's something to be said. So Ivan Lendl, 25.39. Djokovic, again, to your point, 25.37. So to me, this is showing, Bjorn Borg pretty dominant in his time, almost as dominant as a Nadal. So for me, I think I got to go with Bjorn Borg, but I also respect Novak Djokovic being up there.
Fair enough.
Fed, I honestly thought would be a little higher. I thought he would be maybe a solid 3 or 4, and he is in some of the metrics, but in some he's not even top 10. So I think it just depends on how you look at it for Fed. He's definitely a good clay courter. He's not bad by any means, but I wouldn't say he's a historic great on clay either. No. From a Federer fan.
Yeah. I know that hurt, Ben.
It does. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll move on to, I wanted to look, we've already done this with Nadal, looking at how his clay court numbers compare to his normal hard court and all other surfaces number. But I just want to recap a couple things, because I also have Nadal, Djokovic, Federer numbers out here. So just kind of run through it real quick. So we know Nadal's win percentage on clay is much higher than other surfaces. In fact, it's about a 9% higher, and he wins about 10% more return games on clay. And he's losing 1% more service games on clay, which is expected. You don't have the big aces and serves to save you. Federer, on the other hand, he's losing 4% more service games on clay. Kind of surprised me. He still finds ways to hold craftily even on clay, but he gets broken more than Nadal on clay. And he's only winning 1.5% more return games on clay. And Djokovic, he's losing 4% more service games, but he's winning 3% more return games. So if you're keeping track of the plus minus there. We'll also do Bjorn Borg here. So this one, he's losing 14% more return games, which was very shocking to me, the differential there. And he's winning about the same number of return games, 0.2% here. So if you keep track of the differential, Bjorn Borg's like minus 14. Djokovic is minus 1 between those games. Federer is minus 2, 2.5. And Nadal is plus 8.5. So based on that differential alone, it's clear who is winning more games, who is able to be more dominant, and you're not getting as close of matches. There's several matches. I saw Wawrinka. He played an excellent match against Nishikori and beat him in straight sets. Then he went up against Nadal, and it was like 6-2, 6-1. You're like, oh, this stand was starting to look so good, but he went up against a machine in Nadal. And so it just shows, even though he's losing 1% more service games, he's breaking 10% more times. It's mind-boggling. Mm. And Federer, it makes sense with the movement, and he's not able to impose his will of tennis anymore. Really, he's only breaking 2% more. Djokovic is breaking well, not as much as Nadal with 10%. He's breaking at 3%, but he's being broken at 4% rate. So to me, it was really interesting to see those differentials and kind of cement in my mind, yeah, Nadal is the greatest on clay. It's not just matchups. It's also just the way he's able to return ultimately. Who can return best? Because you're going to get broken more, so you want to minimize it, but who is going to return the best? It's important.
Right. Yeah, I was watching the Nadal-Tsitsipas match the other day, and one of the commentators said, well, they quoted somebody. I apologize, I don't know who they were quoting, but they said, I don't consider a break to be a break until it's consolidated. And so it's like, yeah, okay, it's great if you get a break, but if they just break you right back, then it doesn't matter. You're back to even. I thought that was interesting. But to your point, this goes, and I should look this up, but how many French Opens has Rafa won without drawing a set?
Yeah, here. Let me see. It's at least 2 that I know of. So I have it in here on my sheet. 2. There's 2 French Opens he didn't drop a set.
That's a lot of matches. And best of 5, you're bound to drop one somewhere, right? By a fluke or something. But no, 2 whole tournaments where he hasn't dropped a set. That's incredible.
Yeah. And actually I miscounted. So it's 4, but really 3 because the other one he pulled out for injury. So
okay.
Losing those sets. So 3 times he's won it without dropping a set. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, and Federer, I think he's only done that for sure at Wimbledon once because he did it recently. He might have only done it one other time in a slam. And Djokovic, for all the things that we laud Djokovic for, it's not dropping sets. Sometimes he's a big fighter, right? He drops sets frequently enough in majors. I don't think he's won a major without dropping a set.
Yeah, I would be surprised. But he also gets most of his he's gotten a lot of his majors from hard court, and I think it's harder to do that on the hard court.
Yeah.
Than on these other specialty. So
that's true.
Give him that credit. Give him the point.
All right, Matt. Who do you got for the French Open? Who's your pick?
I can't go anywhere but Rafa.
All right.
I always believe. What's that?
I said, and why? Why? Like you said, he doesn't usually disappoint, but even in this year, why are you still going with Rafa? He's having a little bit of
I think until somebody beats him again, there's no reason not to go with him, right? Year over year, Rafa is there and he's consistent and he's there. He's had 3 losses now, I guess, but he's got 11 championships. It's like, I'm not going to bet against that. He might be going into this with less confidence, with fewer wins than in the past. And sure, there might be some evidence there to support maybe a shaky foundation, but in the end, the French Open is Rafa's tournament, and I think he's going to turn it on and dial it in. And as long as he doesn't get sidetracked by an injury, his knees hold out for him and things, I think he'll be there.
Yeah.
So
no, that's a good point. It's hard to argue against that. I'm going to go ahead, but I will pick against it. I will go, and I'm going to go actually even against the betting favorite. So right now, Djokovic is a slight betting favorite. I'm going to go against that too. I'm going to just pick the field. So anybody but Nadal or Djokovic, the two favorites. Of course, Nadal should be probably the overwhelming favorite, but having some struggles this year. I just think based on my model, it's just not set up necessarily to win. I don't know if he's dealing with an injury, if it's just mental, but I'm going to go with team would be probably my most likely pick, but I'm just going to go ahead and chicken out here and just pick the field besides Nadal and Djokovic. I just think it's likely with some of these young guns moving up. Maybe Tsitsipas. I don't think Zverev will get his head together, but you never know.
This is interesting because when we had when we did this at the end of the year last year, and we were talking about our predictions for the coming year, I was all for the young guns, and you were not. And the tables have turned.
Tables have turned. Usually, you got to favor Nadal and Clay, and I figure French Open's the most wide open if you don't have a Nadal. And to me, I just assume it's a given for Nadal every year. But the way I'm seeing it unfold this year, and looking at the numbers, I think it would be an aberration if he was able to pull it off this year. So,
yeah,
you're right. I'm going against my pick, you could say.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
That's great. We'll see what happens.
One thing I do want to say, though, to be clear, not necessarily about the pick, but we talk about Nadal losing at Madrid, close one to Tsitsipas. Those conditions at Madrid aren't going to be the conditions in Rome. We know Madrid, if you've seen Madrid and know about the tournament, it's a higher altitude city in general. The clay there, when it gets warm especially, it plays a lot faster. That's why Federer's been able to do decently there. He's won it a couple times. Nadal, that's probably, not that he plays bad there, but that might be one of his worst tournaments in the clay. Rome, if you want a barometer for the French Open, not that Nadal wins Rome every year, he wins the French Open, but the clay plays similar to Rome. It's slower, the conditions will be similar, it's a lower altitude. So what I'm saying is if Nadal gets comfortable in Rome and plays well there, I think that's a better barometer than Madrid, where the conditions might not mimic it. Now, the temperature at Madrid, if Paris does have a higher temperature, the clay can start to play a little faster. You can kind of see that in the afternoons when it bakes a little bit more. But usually the temperature is moderate enough. It doesn't really have an effect. And Nadal, sometimes he uses it to his advantage. So there's been times where commentators are like, it's playing faster. This could be rough for Nadal. And then all of a sudden he starts ratcheting up the forehand up the line. They're like, just kidding. It's against him. It's against his opponents. This is even worse. So slow conditions or fast conditions don't necessarily mean trouble for Nadal, but it could be if he's playing the right opponent who's trying to take it to him and play the red line tennis. That could be a little bit of a factor, but I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. Rome will be an interesting one, I think, for me to see if he doesn't win it or loses earlier on, semifinals or earlier. Then my pick is definitely going to be still solid. If he wins it, okay, maybe I'm a little bit split, but it'll be interesting, needless to say, because we have Nadal and Federer and Djokovic. We have these top guys all playing. We'll see how they do, because this is going to be that confidence check going into the French, if they can even win it, each of them.
Yep. No matter what, we'll have good tennis. Enjoy it while we can. Enjoy it while the big three are still hanging around. While Fed's back playing clay.
Yeah.
Not going to be there forever.
It's a treat. It is sure a treat to watch tennis with the big four and with the historic players that they have. So until next time, we'll see you guys in the court. And please visit us at cognitionsphere.com, where we post the podcast and these articles. Our theme music is brought to you by Kevin MacLeod with excerpts from his song Cool Rock.